That's a good idea.
Especially Frenchie's, Boston's and Frenchie's.
It's on the agenda.
I know, Mark Chapman, that's got me always.
They have to build a porch and a ramp all the way around to get them to the sidewalk. An
Yeah.
I can
Alright,
only
so show
expect
me
Yeah, and I don't know if there's really anything, well, I mean, he has his grants on there, but I think they're already.
sidewalk at the same.
Firefighters and safer.
Go into,
Safer's the one
But it
that's
wouldn't
got
like,
it.
cause here's the thing.
Good?
It wouldn't
The other
indicate
two
it
are
was
working
like
like.
All right, we'll call to order the Ravenna City Council Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, January 23rd at 6 p.m. The first item on the agenda is approval of the Committee of the Whole meeting minutes from December 19th, 2022. Were there any additions or corrections to those? Do we have a motion to accept as submitted?
So move.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, number 2 on the agenda is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to sign the JCPTC contract with LG Chem and the city. This is sponsored by Community and Economic Development. Ms. Wood?
Yes, we went over this last week. This was the tax credit on the income that we agreed in order as an incentive for LG Chem to come to Ravenna. Is there any questions?
Just to confirm, emergency clause, yes to it.
Yes.
If there's no questions, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Number 3 on the agenda is an ordinance ratifying the mayor's signature of the JCPTC agreement. This is also Community and Economic Development.
This goes along with number 2. This is just allowing the mayor to, or ratifying his signature on the agreement itself. It has to be a separate ordinance per the state.
Any questions on that? And yes to the emergency on that.
Yes.
What's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Number 4 on the agenda is an ordinance to create a moratorium on storage facilities within the city until further review. Also sponsored by Community and Economic Development. Do you?
Yes, I'm going to have Dennis come up and speak to this. He is requesting a temporary moratorium on storage facilities.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Dennis West, the Economic Development Director for the City of Ravenna. And I guess it doesn't matter since she's not here. We've had quite a few inquiries into wanting to place mini storage facilities within the City of Ravenna. And the issue that we have with having these storage facilities come here is, number 1, they're taking up land that we can possibly use for additional commercial business. Number 2, they don't create any jobs, so there's no income benefit to the city at all. The outlying areas like Streetsboro and some of the other areas, they've created moratoriums on retail businesses, especially for like hotels and other types of commercial businesses, because they're getting overpopulated. And what I would like to propose is that council reviews and proposes a short-term moratorium to allow the city to be able to review ordinances, zoning codes, and specifically within C2 and I1, which typically state that, for the record, it is, I've got these marked here. Storage garage, yards, vaults, and including mini storage. And some of these even deal with specific types of commercial business, such as trucking storage, boat storage, and other types of storage for personal use. What we want to try and do is limit these mini storages from coming here and soaking up the available land that we have available. There are areas of concentration that they're looking at, such as up at by 14 and 44, there's a mini storage up at that area, and as 14 starts to curve, there's kind of a triangular piece, and we've had a couple of suggestions or a couple inquiries from mini storages to want to go there. We also had one recently for down by, it's considered Prospect, but it's actually over by Lake Avenue where the former Polymer building was and was taken down. The company that used to, I believe it was an auto body shop that owned all that land, and they sold all that land last year. Some of that land is available, and there's a gentleman who has inquired as to putting in a mini storage back in that section back there by Lake Avenue. So I'm recommending a short-term moratorium until we can take a look at the ordinances or look at the zoning codes and see if there's a way that we can either rewrite these zoning codes or just eliminate the fact of having mini storage companies coming into the area as a whole. Any questions?
Yes. What is the interpretation of short-term? I can look at that in different ways.
You know, we don't have an actual time period set. We don't know what that time period looks like. It's just going to allow us time to be able to sit down and go through all the ordinances and try to figure out what's the best route, what's the best land use for those properties, and do we really need more storage facilities in Ravenna, and when all they're going to be doing is just soaking up available land space that we can use for and market for commercial business. So typically C1 zoning code I reviewed, it doesn't have any type of statements in there regarding mini storage facilities. Those areas could possibly be changed over to C1 instead of C2. There is one area that is zoned I1, which is the Lake Avenue area, and we could possibly look at that as a different type of zoning code as well.
I have I'm not against the moratorium at all. I just, informationally, I have a question. If someone owns property now, and it's in an area that's zoned that's an acceptable use, how is a moratorium going to stop them if they have both of those conditions met already?
Well, the moratorium will allow us the ability to say, right now, we're not permitting that use until further notice.
It will just be an ordinance that will say that?
It will be it's giving the approval from the council to the economic development or to the building planning to say for a short term, we're not permitting this until we rectify these codes.
I guess my question was along the legality, if somebody had it now and it was zoned in an area and they owned it, could they argue that they could go forward?
They would have to be grandfathered, I think.
Yeah.
First of all, we don't use that word, grandfathering. Because, Dr. Calfee, because we currently have no application to Planning Commission at this moment, moratorium is across the board for everybody, whether somebody owns a piece of vacant land and thinks they're interested in building storage units, commercial, they would have to come, because it would be a new project, they are required to come to Planning Commission for permission. So at this point, there aren't any.
And that
would
effectively stop them, the moratorium, right?
They can stop, yes, correct.
So I have major concerns about this. I'm not necessarily opposed to a moratorium because in our code, I don't see anything that restricts storage units. You can correct me. I think they have to be 100 yards away from a residential area. I think that's about the only restriction. So there's certainly some things we might be able to do. Maybe say that they can't be less than a couple miles away from each other. I don't, to stop the proliferation of them. But fundamentally, I do worry that, is it the city's business to tell private landowners, you know, what they can do with their land? If somebody owns property and somebody wants to buy it and turn it into a storage facility, I worry that we are, you know,
I would argue you city council are stewards of this community. You're elected by these residents. And if you were a resident, how would you feel? What would the benefits be? I understand if you own land, it's one thing, but we deal with this, and I'm often asked, will this work in the city? And I look at the code and say, it's in black and white. It's not my opinion if it works.
right.
But the going a little bit farther, these storage units, it isn't the common storage units that you're used to seeing, like up at 14 and 88. We're looking at, they're wanting to bring pods in, set pods on gravel. You know,
Right.
and so
No.
it's different. It continues
I-
to evolve.
Yeah, no, maybe I'm not saying what I want.
There was
I
a
worry
group that
about
wanted
what
to
we,
buy- The group wanted to buy tops, turn that into indoor storage,
right.
and at
No.
C1, so that was easy to say no, but.
I'm talking about a fundamental concept where I worry that we're picking winners and losers, right? And I support a moratorium for I think what you were getting at is a fixed period of time.
Yes.
Not just open-ended. So I would like to see that too. But for the purpose of looking at our code to see what we can do to accomplish what you're saying. Because I don't like the idea of saying, well, we just don't like storage facilities, period, so we don't want them in the city. I think that's a little bit overboard. How we plan where they go and how far they can be from each other will sort of set boundaries to how many we have. And if we have reasonable code, because the other thing I worry about is somebody will take us to court and say, well, why are you just outlawing storage facilities? You know, you're inhibiting my ability to run a business that's legal and not threatening and not, you know, posing any, you know, health problems. So I support the idea that we need to look at this because we have very little. But I don't want us to get to the point where we're outlawing them.
So my recommendation is a temporary moratorium until we complete, if we decide to move forward with the comprehensive plan, which will examine the land use as well as future land use and zoning review. Set the moratorium for that time frame till we're complete with that, and we have a chance to review all the zoning.
I think what you're getting at, I would like to see something on paper. What's the ordinance look like? Just stated clearly so that the next conversation we have, it seems like we're all pulling in the same direction. It's how we're gonna get there. What's that?
The technicality.
Well, the technicality, how it's written, you know, is it 12 months, is it 6 months? So I think based on what other communities are doing, I think Parma, that you pointed out, Rob, and some others in Northeast Ohio, or Ohio generally, if we could see what their ordinances look like and come up with a time frame, write that out, because they're using the same language you're talking about, you know, that the city council desires to review legislation and to enact reasonable regulations as to the size, number, and location of such uses in the city. So they're speaking of those storage facilities. So I think it's just putting it on paper and seeing what it looks like. So, Rob, I don't know if can I volunteer you to work with Dennis or Ms. Wood, just to, I think, how that's going to be written. We have 2 weeks now before the February meeting, so just having something on paper at that time, I think, is what
Yeah.
I'm getting at.
And it would sound more like because it's not going to be 6 months from now when we begin.
Right, so it'll probably be more
something
like
like
a
a year.
year and a half.
Right. And I think it'd be helpful to get some other information, like the current, what do we have, 2 storage facilities?
2 storage facilities.
And they are fairly close, by the way, right?
Yes.
Be nice to know what their occupancy rate is now. You know, if they have half their storage facility units free, you know, why would we want to invite another one? So I think we need a little more data, but I'd be willing to send something back and forth through email to get something ready for the February. You mean for February or?
For the February
Yeah,
meeting,
okay.
unless you wanted it, if you had more runway to enact this later, And I should also say this is sponsored by CED, so I think having Ms. Wood and you possibly work on it with Dennis, I think is probably the better choice, but, yeah, Larry, would you?
Larry Solenius, 123 North Wall. Could you change the zoning code to make storage units conditional instead of permitted?
That would, yeah, those are the that's a really good point, because that would provide a higher level of review anytime somebody wanted to bring one in. That's the kind of thing we need to look at, I agree.
The one thing that we're trying to do right now in economic development is take the little bit of land that we have left available and market that out for commercial business so that we can start attracting that commercial business into the area. That area up there it lacks a lot of, just like downtown, lacks a lot of commercial real estate or commercial amenities that will help support the new businesses that are coming in. And what we want to try and do is bring in those amenities that are going to be able to provide services, meals, whatever, stores for these employees to be able to go to. And we're lacking the land right now within the city itself, so we want to try to make the best use out of what's left out of the city properties.
I think everybody understands your well-intentioned proposal. It's just, I think we need to iron out the specifics.
Yep. Good? Okay, so work on that prior to that February 6th meeting. I believe February 6th is the next one. And have further discussion, hopefully have the ordinance written prior to that. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, with that, what is moving this on or not, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Thanks. All right, next item on the agenda, number 5, is an ordinance to authorize the mayor to apply for the SAFER grant for the fire department, sponsored by Public Health and Safety. Ms. Michael is not here, but I think it's self-explanatory on the SAFER grant. Chief Chappell couldn't be here either, but is there anything we're missing, Mayor?
I don't think so.
Okay.
The chief is next door, but he's masked up and has a cough and didn't think it would be a good idea to come here. I think he's watching.
Okay.
Thank you for masking up and not coming here.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
And I believe, do you know, was this for 3 positions? I believe this was for 3.
That's what he said, yeah,
Okay.
that's what he was saying. This one's for the 3 positions, correct?
Is there any questions from council on this grant?
No.
What's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Ordinance.
Number 6 on the agenda is an ordinance to authorize the mayor to apply for the Assistance to Firefighters Grant, also sponsored by Public Health and Safety. Mayor, do you have any updates on this? We talked about this the last meeting, but I don't know that I have any. AFG is always the big one that they're applying for.
He was working on a grant today. I'm not sure this is it. It might be an additional one that was coming. And with that particular one, he was looking to buy, hope to get 4 turnout gear for the new firemen that we've hired. I can't tell you specifically what this one is, but it's one that I think we apply for regularly and usually get some money back on it or equipment out of it.
So, to be determined on the AFG grant. Is there any questions on?
I wrote down from the last meeting, it was for 2 cot loading systems, about $146,000.
You're right, okay. Thank you, Brian.
That's what I
Yeah,
got on that one.
you're right, the
Yeah.
mechanical loading.
Yes, and the ones that we have are old. And I can remember when we got those, how excited we were because we had a lot of guys developing back problems. And these things allow you to lift heavy or not so heavy patients without them having to strain to do it. So it's an important piece of equipment for the health of our firefighters.
Any questions or comments from council on this item? What's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Number 7 on the agenda is an ordinance to authorize the mayor to apply for the firehouse subs grant for the fire department, also sponsored by Public Health and Safety. I don't believe I have any updates on this. Do you have any, Brian?
I
Okay.
haven't heard anything else, no.
Any questions from council on this item? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Number 8 on the agenda is an ordinance to accept a $1,000 donation from Julie Pachoni Beach for the fire department, also sponsored by Public Health and Safety. All I will say is thank you to Julie for that donation for the, I believe it was 9/11 memorial. Any questions from council? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Number 9 on the agenda, correct me if I'm wrong, Chelsea, this is the one that we had already approved
It's already been done.
in January, so we'll move on to number 10 with that item, which is an ordinance to formally accept Ray Ann Parkway as a city street, sponsored by Streets and Sidewalks. Mr. Harper.
Yeah, exactly what it says, not much
Yeah.
more to say. That one.
Any questions from council? Do we get a ribbon cutting for the street?
Do you want there to be?
When was the last time, Mr. Calfee, that we had a street?
We looked it up. It was a pretty long time ago.
Should be a ribbon cut.
Enterprise Parkway, probably.
That's true.
There's another street called True Industrial Parkway. Do you know where it's at? It's in the city. South Pratt Street at the railroad tracks. Yeah. Nothing's been done with it, but it was built in the 90s. So Ray and Ann have both asked to be part of placing the street sign. The street department has already built the street sign, but they didn't install it because Ray and Ann wanted to be. So we could do the ribbon cutting then if you'd like.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Sounds good.
A particular day or a time that would work. Obviously during the daylight hours would be ideal.
Maybe when it's not snowing.
Afternoon, when it's a little warmer.
Well, and we can, because we're not gonna the road is not officially open, but people are using it. But the street department has been told not to plow it, so, because we haven't accepted it 100% yet.
Okay.
So if you wanna wait until the snow's
Well,
off
you
and it's a little
let
nice.
us know what works best for you, and we'll see.
Okay.
Questions from council?
No.
What's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Number 11 is an ordinance to authorize the mayor to enter into a 1-year license with Pegasus Software, also Streets and Sidewalks. Mr. Harper?
Yeah, this software is to help the engineering office with reporting. It's reporting software will help them out, streamline some of the reports they're doing right now.
Questions from council? What's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
All right. Number 12 is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to purchase pursue
Pursue, please,
Pursue.
pursue, not purchase.
aerial easements along Main Street. This is also Streets and Sidewalks, Mr. Harper.
Exactly what it says. We're gonna approach, I believe, 24 residents and businesses to gain permission for an easement so that we can move the power poles, so widening Main Street will be able to move forward and safer with the poles being moved.
Questions on this item?
I did ask this question before about the pole, whenever we move it to the far side of the sidewalk. None of the poles are going to be actually in the sidewalk, are they? They're going to be on the other side of the sidewalk.
In theory, yes, that is correct.
In theory.
I won't say 100% because there could be places that does happen. The intent would be to make sure the poles are on in our right-of-way. So if the sidewalk is against the right-of-way, then the pole will have to adjust the sidewalk at those locations.
And we've also talked about in the past, some of the poles that are out there that the utilities haven't been taken off of and are still in existence and should be,
There's two.
are they gonna be then removed
Yes.
as part of?
They're gonna get taken down here real soon, those two specific poles, yes.
Okay.
So the project that was done a few years ago had both distribution and transmission. And the transmission were the giant poles that were very large at the base. These poles won't. These are distribution poles, so they're much smaller. They're standard 40-foot high poles. So if they are in the sidewalk a little bit, it's not gonna have nearly the impact. But I don't know exactly where the right-of-way is. First Energy believes they can fit them in there without affecting the sidewalk. But it won't surprise me that we do have a couple slabs of sidewalk that are affected.
It would be our hope that all of them would be beyond the sidewalk.
Correct, absolutely. Yes.
Any other questions on this item? What's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
All right, number 13 is a resolution in support of closing Day Street at railroad tracks and creating a cul-de-sac. Was this just an update for today?
Yeah, I believe we're not gonna move this forward today. We're still trying to put together an informational meeting with the railroad and also the residents that this will affect, to hear their voice, allow them to voice their concerns before we continue forward with this.
Okay. So no action on this item. Number 14 on the agenda is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to apply for the Step Outside grant through ODNR. This is sponsored by Planning. Mr. Karas?
Yeah, so Parks and Recs is looking to get this grant for $500 for our archery program. To pay for mostly targets, little things like that. The grant specifically identifies an event in April, and we would, although I don't believe there's a matching component, putting up $170 as well as the $500 to put on this event. So this is just to authorize the mayor to apply for the grant.
Questions? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Number 15 on the agenda is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Quality Control Inspection, QCI, also sponsored by Planning.
Yeah, this is our annual sort of backup, fail-safe contract in case we need inspectors. If I remember, we didn't use them last year at all.
Correct. We did not use them last year.
But we do have some projects that may require their use. The contract, I assume, will be in the packet for the meeting, and I'm sure it's the same as it was the last year.
Same, the price went up a little bit per hour, and they also defined the overtime rate as part of this contract.
Okay.
Questions or comments from council? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Number 16 on the agenda is an ordinance to amend codified ordinance section 1478 to include carbon dioxide detectors. Sponsored by Planning.
Monoxide.
Monoxide, okay.
Monoxide, yes.
Yeah, so apparently there's new, is it legislation or just guidelines
It's
that
code.
require, it's
The fire code requires.
fire code, okay.
Other communities, such, PMHA, they're requiring, other communities are also requiring it. We should be following the fire code. Of course, the fire
Right.
department supports it. Without putting the burden on landlords, we're gonna inform them their next inspection, but then the biennial, they would be required to have it, if they don't already. I'm guessing most do not have it.
So my question was where this thing goes, because the new wording about carbon monoxide detectors, you listed in 1478.10, which is where I believe equipment is identified, but then chapter 1462, we changed the name of that chapter to smoke and CO2 detection and alarm devices, but there's nothing else in 1462 that's changed in what you submitted. So is that gonna be a problem? I mean, I have the code in front of me.
Yeah, I got a piece of it for some reason.
Yeah, my packet was a little cut off too, but you had emailed me
Yeah.
stuff.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
My original intent was just to add that to the section, but Don Rose wanted to add a section because there's little different criteria from a smoke detector in every bedroom, and a carbon monoxide is on each floor.
Yeah,
So
no,
it spelled it out a little bit more.
I think adding 1478.10 is fine the way you have it.
Then we
What I'm saying, though, is if you look at 1462, right now it says smoke detection and alarm devices, and we're adding smoke detection and CO2 devices. But then when you look throughout the rest of that chapter, it doesn't mention CO2 detectors at all. And it does mention those others, and it also establishes a penalty. And I don't know if maybe what you just said, you don't want to establish a penalty, I don't know. But I mean, you can have a penalty and not necessarily apply it. But you might want to just take a look at 1462, that chapter. It's not very long. And you might think about maybe just plugging it in, you know, right next to where it says smoke, just put in NCO2 or something like that.
Okay. All right, well, I'll have Dawn look at it in the morning and send something out to you.
Any questions from council on this item? What's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
All right, number 17 on the agenda is an ordinance to amend the payroll ordinance to increase the inspection rate. Sponsored by Personnel, Mr. Calvin.
This affects the inspection rate for 3 different types of inspections: plumbing inspection, backup inspector for building and electrical, and backup inspector of plumbing, heating, and AC. It's increasing them from $30 to $35, and it's upon recommendation from Mr. Finney.
Is there any questions?
So,
Oh, yep.
We have the general payroll ordinance under review, and we're tweaking it. Can we just add this to it? I mean, do we need a separate ordinance for this?
You probably want to get it now, don't you?
Well, no, well, we can wait for the payroll ordinance. That's fair. Expecting the payroll ordinance to be approved.
February. I
February.
mean, that's the plan, right?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that's when this would get approved anyway,
Correct, yeah,
so
that's
make it
adequate.
more efficient.
All right, and I'll add a 17 and a half to this payroll ordinance then, for discussion purposes and something on the agenda for the next meeting. 260.13 negotiable compensation. So we will have something in front of us to amend that, possibly amend that. I'm waiting on a response from our law director, and I'll talk to the mayor and Brian just to make sure that we're doing this correctly, we're thinking about it correctly, but we'll have something in front of us prior to the next meeting. So the last item on the agenda is an executive session to discuss legal matters. Do you have any information on that, Mayor, or should we save that for the February meeting?
He needs to present that.
Okay,
Is he coming tonight?
Well, he said he was.
we can save that for the February meeting then.
Unless we want to give them a few minutes or not.
We did that pretty quick.
Based on our past performance, he might be waiting
Yeah.
until it's like 7 o'clock or so.
We reach out.
Based on
see
the
if
based on the 2 things that he talked about and presented to us, I don't see that it's
Unless he had,
between this and 2 weeks.
unless he had
Yeah,
something else.
But
I
he's not
agree.
here and not contacted us, so.
You all right
Unless
with?
there's a way to contact him and see if he's on his way.
I don't believe so. Is this, in your opinion, something that can wait 2 weeks, the next meeting?
It's a follow-up
Okay, yeah.
on what he talked about.
Okay, let's just save it for the February meeting. So that's everything on the agenda this evening, so if there's nothing else, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.